Andy, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. Very much appreciate it. First of all, how are you? And maybe you can tell folks a little bit about your career background and how did you get into, competitive intelligence? Because it looks like you've been in it for quite a few years.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I started my career in sales, but I actually got my degree in marketing, and while I was in sales, I was usually like pretty actively trying to figure out how I could get out of it and into an actual marketing role. And at the same time, I was working in a pretty small town in Michigan, my wife and I were just pretty much looking for a change, after about a year and a half of sales, threw out applications at a bunch of different places in a bunch of different states. And finally, ended up getting a response from a company called ZoomInfo. They were looking for an associate product marketing manager. And so we moved out to Vancouver, Washington. That was my first like quote unquote marketing gig. And I really loved it. It was me and one other product marketer. And it was like back when ZoomInfo was like 500 employees ish. So got to do a lot of things, wear a lot of hats, kind of do like the full stack PMM type thing, and see the company grow pretty significantly during that time. And One of the things I really enjoyed doing while I was there was competitive intel, and was lucky enough that as a company grew and we brought on more product marketers, I was able to kind of specialize more in that function, build out a more formal program, and just pretty much go from owning a lot of different functions to just that one. I really enjoyed doing that. Along the way, learned a lot, met a lot of other competitive intel folks, and then ended up going over to ClickUp, which is where I'm at now, doing competitive intel over there, as well as some other product marketing work. And I'm also put together, a bunch of competitive intel resources like a podcast, newsletter, community, all that kind of stuff to help other people who are interested in that space.
Yeah, well, I got to give you a shout out because we had posted a post on like 10 influencers or experts in product marketing to follow, and you kept getting tagged in it. And I was like, awesome, I got to get in contact with Andy. So I very much appreciate you hopping on. Speaking of product marketing, and I ask this every time I speak to someone. Number one, because I've really been focused on learning about the function the last couple years. I too was in sales, and then sort of like got into marketing more formally. And product marketing has definitely been on my radar for a variety of reasons the last couple of years. And it seems to be this like role that's kind of specific to the stage of the business, the responsibilities, kind of what needs to get done from your perspective. What is product marketing, or what should PMMs focus on within an organization? And then, kind of how do you see that role evolving over time?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think you hit the nail on the head in the very beginning there. Like it really depends on the maturity of the organization. If you're a product marketer at a really early stage company and like less than 100 or 200 people, you're probably only going to be like a team of one, maybe two, but you're going to be wearing a lot of hats. You'll be doing everything from like messaging, positioning to owning the full like product launch itself, probably your fair share of enablement, competitive intel, creating buyer personas. Like I said, just like a little bit of everything. But again, as like the company will mature, you'll end up getting more and more resources, and that's usually the time where you'll start to see people starting to kind of niche down into one of those kind of functional areas. And so I can tell you that it really just depends on how like the business is structured, how the products that you sell are packaged. Like for example, when I was at ZoomInfo, um, we had our team broken down by product. There was a lot of individual products at ZoomInfo. There was like Chorus, the conversation intelligence tool. There was Engage, our sales engagement tool. We had like the main platforms, so just a ton of platforms, right, or different tools. Obviously it wouldn't make sense for like one person to own every single one of those products, like, to have kind of the expertise that you would need to be able to craft all the messaging that you need to make sure that folks are enabled on like everything that they need. And so it made sense to kind of block people off on a product perspective and then be essentially like PMM owners, right? At ClickUp, it's a little bit different because we really just have one product. It's the ClickUp platform. And Instead of breaking out people based on different products. We have folks that own, number one, the platform and specific features within the platform. But then we also have an audiences PMM team or like a segments team. So they really focus on mastering kind of our buyer personas and understanding exactly like what their specific pain points are, what ClickUp can do to solve those pain points, how to speak their language. And that's really helpful for us because, like for example, ClickUp can do a lot for dev teams, software teams. They can also do a lot for marketers, but the way that we would talk to each of those teams is so different. And also the things that each of those teams find value in at ClickUp is very different. And so that's what that team really helps us out with. But in either case, that's kind of a couple of the ways that I've seen things work in the past.
And how do you see this role evolving, kind of moving forward? Just, I guess, in things like, I keep hearing, oh, product marketing, we don't have our own budgets and we gotta, you know, to kind of like beg for tools and things like that, and it ends up causing a lot of friction and inefficiencies.
Yeah,
Things like that. You think that that the role is going to continue to build out, and as a result, like be able to maybe carve out their own sort of line items and things like that.
I think it's about grown as much as it can. Without the tools that we need. Maybe I said that kind of in a funny way, but let me put it this way. Like, I think that there's a big gap in terms of, product marketing tech stacks, like specifically for product marketers. What I've found is that most product marketers are using sales tools or marketing tools, like for attribution or for reporting, all those types of things. And so there really isn't many tools that speak directly to product marketers. And I think that's because it's, a relatively new-ish profession, or I shouldn't maybe say new, but it's been getting a lot more attention probably over the past 5, 6 years. And so just based on that, right, that there's not that many tools out there that are dedicated to tailoring to product marketers. And so I think that there's definitely an opportunity for sure for some other tools to come in and really show like how important product marketing is, how important that function is to startups and the value that they create. Because right now, to your point, like it's very challenging to justify paying tens of thousands of dollars on software when in a lot of cases you can't tie it directly back to revenue.
Mm.
And I think we're especially seeing that big push in these economic conditions,
Yeah.
right? Like procurement, CFOs, they're all like super, super honed in on making sure that every purchase makes sense and is directly attributable to revenue. And so, in either case, long-winded way of me saying, yes, I think that there's a huge opportunity. I don't think that we're there yet, though.
Got it. Let's double click into competitive intelligence here a little more, just because I know that's your expertise, and I'm super excited to learn from you. At a high level, like how can folks sort of think about competitive intelligence, and when should an organization start to say, you know what, it's time that we deploy that? Or maybe is it day one? Do we have, you know, of a marketer's time, 10%, let's say, or 5% dedicated day one to competitive intelligence?
Yeah, it has to be a pretty consistent thing for sure if you're actually going to make it a part of someone's role. But the thing is, you really need to have some kind of cadence as soon as possible or as early as possible. I don't know if you need to call it like a formal program, but you should have somebody that is routinely checking on the market, right? I mean, there's a reason why in most cases, like when you're pitching to investors, you talk about the market landscape, like who are the competitors that are already in the space? Who are the incumbents? What are people already using? And there's a reason why you have to touch on that kind of stuff. And so for the same reason, you should have somebody who's able to like kind of analyze the space, figure out, okay, like what are people already using? What are the strengths and weaknesses of those tools relative to ours? And then how can we incorporate that into our messaging, right? Because otherwise, you can go through the whole process of, you know, uh, the other product marketing functions of, right, okay, got to write messaging, positioning, got to create buyer personas, we have to enable. But if you're ending up creating those things without any real like awareness of what's happening in the market or what your competitors are already doing, then all of those things are going to kind of fall flat, or I shouldn't even say fall flat, it'll just get ignored, right?
Mm,
Because people have seen it before, or they already have a solution for that. So why would they take a look at you?
yeah.
And so that's why I try to say, like, you know, at this point, right, because it's my full-time thing and it was at Zoom Info as well, like there's certain like levels of intensity that you can have, uh, that you bring into like a competitive intel program. And you don't need to have all of that when you're first starting out, but you should absolutely have like an awareness of like, okay, here's like our top 5 competitors that we're consistently running into or that we consistently think that we could win against. And you're staying on top of like what their strategy is and kind of how they're moving around in the market. That would be my suggestion.
One thing that I would add from a sales perspective, and this is something that I saw at a previous startup that I helped launch for last few years, was if your sales team is going out there and telling inaccurate stories about competitors, right? Which is interesting, right? I think that it is something that your competitor could use against you, right? And I don't think a
100%.
lot of people think about that. Like, I remember, I won't say the companies just out of respect and so on, but I remember there was a salesperson on our team that heard, somehow they got wind of some kind of chorus recording or whatnot,
Hmm.
um, of the competitor and an email, I believe, um, that was talking about us poorly, right? And
Hmm.
saying inaccurate things around our functionality, right? Things that we didn't have. And then our salesperson, I remember that individual shared it in the Slack channel, said, look at this XYZ competitor saying these things. And what was interesting is he was able to turn it around and say, actually, they're not true. I think that you should like question their integrity, because here's the functionality and here, and was able to
Hmm.
then flip it, and then ended up winning that deal because now he instilled um doubt in the integrity of the competitor, right? Because
100%.
they had
Yeah.
inaccurate information.
Yeah, I mean that's huge. And I always say, so like if you're going to create any kind of shareable asset, whether that's like a pitch deck, a one pager, case study, like you have to assume that it's going to get in the hands of a competitor. Like just like from the jump, try to keep that in mind. So that way, if you're ever like I don't know 100% if this thing is true, like take it out, just because again, like it happens all the time at ClickUp and at Zoom Info too, right? You have people that like will just forward random assets that you had sent to a customer or something like that, and they'll pass it along to other vendors. And so you just have to keep in mind, like, if you are going to create something that's externally facing, then you just have to assume that someone else is probably going to get their hands on it. But that's the important thing about writing, like strategic messaging. The best kind of messaging is true, differentiated, and even if the competitor has access to it, they can't really do anything about it. That's usually that's kind of like the secret sauce of creating something like on a website headline or something like that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about onboarding and training of, speaking of salespeople, because that seems to be one of the biggest things, as we here at our little startup have been focused on talking to product marketers the last several months, just as we've kind of been developing our product. One thing that really pops up is product marketing and sales alignment, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of the issues there. You know, and I was talking to the former head of product at a competitive intelligence SaaS tool. I won't name the tool out there, but they helped with this data and this function, and they were saying one of the biggest challenges they had. I think you could like create battle cards and competitive intel info on these battle cards, send them to sales. One of the biggest challenges they had was like sales actually using them and
Mm.
spending the time to understand them and get onboarded and then really unlock their power. So, from your experience, and I think you're probably the only individual I've ever spoken to that has such a breadth of knowledge around this. Um, what tips could you give folks out there, around PMMs out there, around like just developing a better relationship, onboarding sales teams around particularly, competitive intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, you have to start the relationship early. So I always recommend getting involved in some kind of onboarding that whoever is going through. So it could be sales, it could also be actually probably sales would make the most sense. I mean, you can do it for other functions too. But I think that especially with sales, it makes sense to jump in like within the first couple weeks, introduce yourself and say like, hey, here's how we think about our competitive landscape. You're going to run into these competitors. This is their strengths. These are our strengths relative to those. Here are differentiators. And that's all like, you can just kind of like wave and like let them go on, right? Because they're, drinking from the fire hose at that point. But at least getting that introduction is super key because then they'll be able to, number one, trust you, and number two, like reach out to you if they have any questions down the road. Um, so that's like kind of ideally like after you've been in the role for a while, you can like do a training. But the other piece that I think speaks more to what you were talking about of like not having sellers use competitive materials. I think that all goes back to just not creating a good relationship with sales and just assuming that because you make something that they're going to do something about it, right? I think that when you are trying to create a partnership, it's exactly that. It's like it's not a one-way thing of you creating and then forcing onto somebody else. In a lot of cases, I try to incorporate the sales team into the assets that I'm creating. So understanding, okay, like what do you typically run into? Where do you usually get stuck? What are things that people usually ask you that you need help answering? And then incorporating that information into whatever it is, like a battle card or a one pager. It's really no different than thinking about your sales team as your customers, right? If you're in competitive intel or product marketing, you need to talk to them all the time. You need to be on like a first name basis with like the top sellers and figure out different ways of making them successful because then once you become successful with them and they feel really comfortable with you, the other people on the sales teams are going to be like, oh wow, like um, Melissa, the top seller on the team, like she's always talking with our head of product marketing or like our product marketing manager, like, and they have a great relationship. Like I should try to talk, like like they try to mimic the top performers. Once you can do that, then you've created a really great foundation for making sure that okay, cool. Like when I do create something, people know that okay, this is legit and it should help me, kind of a thing. So that's what I would recommend.
Awesome. What would you say from your experience, just kind of being a product marketer? And I know you're focused on competitive intelligence, but just, what you've seen across the board within the PMM function, what would you say is like maybe the biggest challenge, if, just something that's top of mind?
Um, I think a couple of things. The first one that's been pretty recent, like that I've just like started to think about more, that I've heard from with folks in my community, because right, a lot of people have been like out of work or have been laid off and are finding new roles. And one thing that somebody mentioned in the community was saying, they'll go like kind of on like a tour, for the first 30 days of like just like learning who the department heads are and stuff like that and just making sure like put a face to the name kind of a thing. And one of the questions that they asked that I thought was really, really interesting was, what is your perception of product marketing? Like based on, it could have been a previous person that was in the role, or it could have just been, maybe this is the first time product marketing is being developed and invested in an organization. So like just understanding like what is product marketing and what is it here to do, getting that understanding from everybody is super, super key because I found that it can be different for a lot of people. A lot of people could think that product marketing is literally just like creating different one pagers for people. A lot of people could think that it's just being a project manager for launching products, right? And that might be the case for different companies, but what you are going to actually bring to the table, it's really important that you make sure that that's known across the company. That way you can be looped into the things that are really important, that make sense and that are relevant for you and that you can make an impact on. That's one. The other thing is just, and this is like a super like kind of generic response, but it's important, and that's communication. Making sure that you are in touch with all the other different stakeholders, department heads, and that you're keeping them up to date on things that are going on. I mean, product marketing has their hands in a lot of different things. And what I've found is that it, it, I'm sure you can relate as being like a part of like multiple startups. Like things change all the time,
Mm,
but not everybody in an organization is always privy to those changes when they're made. And so sometimes I've found that product marketing is kind of the de facto like communicator or like the messenger when things are changing, like whether that's like a really big launch has been pushed out, whether that's creating the new like pitch deck or like aligning all on like this new narrative, all those types of things. You might not be like the ultimate decision maker, but like you are one of the people that ultimately messages some of these changes. And if you don't do that well, then you can lose trust pretty quickly. And so in either case, that's kind of like a gotcha that I feel like many people don't think about. But if you can again kind of step up to the plate and take ownership of that like messenger kind of role, I think that usually works out well for folks.
awesome. Andy, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today. Very much appreciate it. Just real quick, because I know we're wrapping up here. Any sort of, you know, tools out there that really stand out to be specifically product marketing tech that you maybe feel are part of the ever evolving and growing PMM tech stack?
Yeah, let me think. Tools, tools, tools. I mean, I've been using Clue for a little
Hmm.
over a year, which has been a great competitive enablement tool. I've used, let me think. Um, well, actually, why don't you tell me what does what's the company that you work for again?
Yeah, yeah, it's called Asim. We're brand new, so we're
Okay,
only a
okay.
couple months old.
What I don't want to do is like be like, oh yeah, like
Oh
this
no,
tool that
it's
I've used in the
cool.
past is a competitor, like they're great
Oh,
too. So
not at all. We're pretty democratic here, and
okay,
we're
okay,
still we're figuring it out. But even though, hey, you know what? I'm kind of a different guy when it comes to that. I feel like the world is big, and if
nice.
you have competitors, I think it's a good thing, right?
Nice, nice, nice. Okay, cool. Well, the only other one that I've used in the past that's been pretty helpful has been HighSpot. I used
Hmm.
that a couple of
Yep.
months, or excuse me, a couple of years ago when I was back at Zoom, and so that was really helpful too. But I don't know, to be honest. And like I said, this is where I feel like there's a lot of opportunity. There
Yeah.
aren't that many like product marketing tools, and so like I can share other tools, but they're like kind of salesy tool, like like call recorders and stuff like that. Obviously, we use ClickUp at ClickUp, and so I've
Absolutely.
grown to really love that product. But in either case, like I said, I think there's a huge opportunity for creating a really impactful, high quality product for product marketers. So there you go. You're
Yeah.
in the right space.
All right. Well, we'll see. We're trying our best, but certainly I think like ClickUp is a good example of like a tool that just had us what I would consider like a superior user experience, pretty superior product in a space that's been around for a while, right? Like,
Yeah,
project management, task management. I mean, these things have been around for as long as I can remember. I've been in this game for 20 whatever 22 years, and so it's one of those things where there's competitors, but you come with a differentiated product, you come with a better user experience, just come with these nuances, and you can really take over a market, and or certainly carve out your a legitimate piece of that market, right?
totally. Totally. And I thought the same thing when I was evaluating even coming over to ClickUp. I was like, man, like there's already a lot of project management tools. But then like I dug a little bit deeper and I was able to see like, oh man, like there's really something here. And you see that with a lot of other categories now. I mean, I think that's really the fun part of competitive intel for me. It's that like you might think that a category has been completely like depleted of any innovation, but then somebody will come in and really like bring it back to life. I'm seeing that too, like with there's a company called Beehive,
Mhm. Yeah.
Beehiiv, and same thing, like newsletters or like email automation, right? Like there's hundreds of those tools out there. And they're coming in and they're making a bunch of waves, like, and I'm pretty sure most of it's organic too, which is
Mm.
impressive. However long that lasts, like who knows, but it's still a really cool thing, just knowing that like you can always carve a niche or make something a bit more interesting. um yeah, so in either case, totally agree with you.
Awesome. Well, Andy, thank you so much for taking the time. If folks want to connect with you, would LinkedIn be the best kind of channel to reach you?
Totally. Yep. LinkedIn. Then like I said, if you click on my profile, you'll see like I got a newsletter, podcast community. You can click into all that stuff. And so, yeah, would love to connect.
Awesome. Well, have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, dude.